I gotta say, I've been outraged for quite a while that no one takes seriously the werewolf problem that we have, and finally, today's film is going to rectify that. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith. I'm the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I am really glad that we have with us today writer, director, actor, producer, star Jim Cummings, who happened to make this cool little movie called The Wolf of Snow Hollow. And it gets into the werewolf problem. And it's not a documentary, unfortunately, although it could be, but it is not a documentary. And it addresses the werewolf problem, I think, in the appropriate way that it needs to be addressed. So I commend Jim on doing this. And it's the perfect month for it because it's Halloween as well. So look, this is an indie movie. It can now be seen on any screen that you own. So I hope you go check it out and search it out. As always, we start with non-spoilers before we get into our spoilers. But I was really glad to have Jim because we almost did something for his last film. So I was glad that we were able to make this film happen. It was cool because during the pandemic here in Los Angeles, the Beyond Fest did a screening of the movie at the drive-in, the Mission Tiki drive-in. And it was nice that like Jim was able to have a big screen debut, which is so rare during the pandemic. So that was cool for him. But now, truly, any screen you have, you could see this movie. And what was so great about Jim in this Q&A, although he wasn't very involved in the movie at all, because he only wrote it, directed it, produced it, and acted in it, but he did have some good things to say about it. So I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. I happen to publish it. You could find it over at backstory.net. And, if you've never read us, now would be a great time to check us out with our free issue, which you could test drive over there at backstory.net. And if you want to save $5 off a subscription, we could certainly use you as a subscriber. You could use discount code SAVE5 at backstory.net, and that'll save you $5 off a subscription. You could read it at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop, or you could, of course, use our iPad app, which looks beautiful, by the way. I like them both, but the iPad app I'm always impartial to because it just looks awesome. But you could only use the discount code at backstory.net, and your access, your login, your password will then get you into the iPad if you want to read us on an iPad. So it's very easy. We would love your support. Doing a film magazine during a pandemic has been a challenge, to say the least. And we are finally coming out with our issue 42, our long delayed and fun pandemic issue. But it's going to have some really cool stuff in it. So I really hope you check it out and keep updated as to what's going on our sites. But now, without any further ado, we are going to get into our Q&A about The Wolf of Snow Hollow with writer, director, actor, and producer Jim Cummings. Okay, finally, here we go. Jim Cummings, we're ready for you, man. I was late because of a parent-teacher conference. We're just going from one Zoom to the other, damn it, and I apologize for being late. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good. Well, so, I think the easiest place to start is breaking in stories. And, did you study writing, directing anywhere, or was this something that you kind of learned on the job?
I went to Emerson College in Boston and studied film, but the vast majority of the stuff that I learned was outside of class. I had good buddies that wanted to bully each other into making short things and turning our friends into film crew on the weekends. And so there was a lot of really good friendly competition that started my experience of what it's like to make movies now. And then, that just became a slow growth towards this first studio movie of mine, which is crazy. I was able to kind of bring all of my favorite people in this weird summer camp in the snow. And I really don't think that I have a really formal education in film or film theory, but I've seen 100,000 movies. And so because of that, I think I know what I'm talking about.
No, that's good. That's good. Well, it's always curious to hear like the path towards actually really getting to be able to write and direct. And, I was glancing at your IMDb and I know you've worn many hats, but I know your first producing gig and also story by was on Floodwall Here, No Floodwall Here.
Yeah.
In 2010.
Yeah.
What was that, and how did that lead toward your path of writing and directing?
Yeah, that was a very small micro budget movie that my buddies and I made in New Orleans immediately after graduating from college. That summer, we kind of went down to my hometown, New Orleans, and shot this like $12,000 feature, and it became grad school a bit for all of us. And I mean, Danny Madden, who is the creative director on Wolf of Snow Hollow, was the camera operator for No Flood Wall here. And so like it was very much just buddies coming together to make something. And I spent 2 years basically editing the film only to have it suck. And like I just learned
Two
so much.
years.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A year and a half I was doing it, and then like sending it to festivals, and it screened at the New Orleans Film Festival, but that was it. And it was just this kind of exercise in complete failure. But that got me to become bulletproof, where I was like, all right, well, now I know what landing on your face is like. Let's land on our feet next time. And so I just tried as hard as I could with every one of the future projects that we did to make something, undeniable, make something that was just undeniably entertaining. And
What do you, sorry to interrupt, but what do you think went wrong?
Many things that happen with first-time feature filmmakers, where you presume that the audience is going to be interested in whatever you're talking about, rather than making the audience interested in what the themes of the movie are. And so it really did feel a bit like it was 10 short films that were cut together that happened to star the same cast, instead of it being this flow. I didn't know that much about how to do sequence editing or montage or anything that makes a movie a movie. And so because of that, it was an incredible learning experience of how not to do it moving forward. And since nobody's seen that film, I have like not released it anywhere, and it's not incredible, but there's a lot of small things in it where it's like, okay, well, that worked. Like the emotionality there worked, or the comedy there worked. But yeah, I mean, it was just this wonderful litmus test for all of us to kind of pass, of like, cool, we know what we're doing in the production side, but now we get to focus on how to tell better stories.
You obviously did some short films as well, and that led to television for you. And it seems like you kind of had TV as a training ground. Would you say that's correct?
I mean, kind of. Like the majority of the television that I've been in has been like cameos in buddies stuff. So like so I made a short film called Thunder Road that won Sundance, won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance, and then after that, making that short film, I had people who like saw the short that loved it, that cast me in TV stuff very, awesomely. I'd never been in any kind of real production before. And I got to be in The Handmaid's Tale and in Casual. I get to work with Reed Morano and Jason Reitman. And it was just like a really wonderful year of doing that. And then I was like, all right, cool, let's just keep making shorts. So I made 9 more single take shorts in the next year and a half after winning Sundance. And then that got us geared up to be able to make the Thunder Road feature, which we made, basically 2 years after the short was made.
I thought you had also directed some television. Was I wrong on that?
No, I haven't directed TV
okay.
yet.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'd love to. We're developing stuff right now. Maybe that's it. We're developing stuff right now that we would be directing and writing and acting in. Same thing with the features that we make, but for longer form series. Yeah.
Well, just briefly about Thunder Road, when you went to expand it to a feature, what were some of the difficulties that you found? Because it doesn't always translate. Yeah.
Every single problem. Like there's this stress of making something really good, which I think the Thunder Road short is. Like it won Sundance. It screened at basically every film festival that was kind enough to have it. And there was such a fandom for that short that when I said I wanted to make a feature of it, people were like, "You're gonna fuck it up. Like don't do it. Why would you do that? It's like it's already a really good short. Don't screw it up." And so that stress, that timidity, was really deep in me. But that became the pressure that I needed to make it great, to make the feature great. And so like after the release of that short and the notoriety of having something like that do well on the festival circuit and on Vimeo, then we were able to kind of focus on what that feature would be. But it took me a year to realize that it could be a feature in the first place. I was making these 9 other shorts, and then only after that I was like, oh yeah, this could be the opening scene, and then the rest of the movie would be this guy having to convince his daughter that he's not a lunatic and to like him again. And so, yeah, it took a long time, but then it happened all at once of like, it was this thing where like, I finally was able to build up the courage to be like, okay, yeah, no, we can forget that the short is its own thing. This is going to be the feature version of it. And that's a different narrative style.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, you did the father-daughter relationship crisis again in your current movie. What was your toughest scene for Thunder Road? What was the scene that, as a writer, as a director, and they could be different scenes, by the way, that you kept coming back to, and how did you creatively solve that challenge?
There are two. The funeral scene is notoriously like one of the hardest things to do. I've seen people do it since, men and women, actors who use it as a monologue, and it is fucking hell to do. Like, it is hard on the body. It's hard to get right. It's like 1,000 micro performances of comedy and drama with a very copywritten song and a complicated choreographed dance routine. And weaving the comedy and drama throughout is just a very difficult monologue to perform. It was made that way. It's supposed to be. That's why it's any good. That was really difficult. And then the parking lot monologue, the shouting match of me taking all my clothes off and getting fired, that was something that we knew had to top the original monologue. If the movie's about a guy having a nervous breakdown and you do that in the opening scene, the one that happens at the climax has to be even crazier, which is difficult to do in comparison with the opening scene. Both of those were really hard on me, not just because of the technical stuff of making sure that the camera is the exact focal length that it needs to be to reveal the daughter in the right time, or like reveal the cell phone of somebody filming it at the right time for the joke, but also on the vocal cords. Like, if you're shouting, you can only do it really twice, and then that's it. So you have to rehearse it 1,000 times at half volume, only to go full volume and not faint when you're doing it. But yeah, I mean, Jackie Chan does that kind of stuff all the time, and that's what makes him Jackie Chan. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Well, we'll talk about this more for Wolf, but I guess that's a good place to kind of ask this question. I'm sure you're sick of hearing it, but I am curious. What are the challenges for acting and directing yourself? I mean, because it takes some getting used to from people I've interviewed. So I'm just kind of curious what you think about that.
I'm very lucky because I have a team of people who are helpful in that. So if ever I'm screwing it up on set, I can run out to the video village and go, I'm just not feeling it. I don't know what's going on. And then I have people being like, well, make it, do it like this or try it like this. And then we're able to do it. So I'm very lucky to have the team around me. But I find it easier to act in scenes that you've written than getting an actor to act in a scene that you've written. Like, I'm not a very good director, I don't think. Like, I'm a better writer and then actor, and then that makes me a director accidentally, where I can write something and it has the certain inflection and language, and English and comedy is so complex that it has to be a certain way. So instead of spending the weeks rehearsing with actors to kind of like get it to work, I know how it's got to be, so it's just easier for me to do it. And that was the real benefit of Thunder Road, where I didn't have to rehearse with an actor for 24 hours a day. I had access to the lead actor 24 hours a day, so I could rehearse in the shower or on the drives to set, and like, I knew what needed to be done to get the performance to be any good. And so I just had to do that, especially as a non-actor myself. I'm not trained as an actor. And so that neuroticism of like, oh no, I'm going to suck at this, means that I just have to rehearse it 1,000 times.
Really, I always assumed that you had some training. So you weren't trained at all? You just wanted to step into it? I mean, that's great.
Yeah. I always say I knew what good acting looked like. And I just tried to do that.
Okay. That totally makes sense. Obviously we're going to get to spoilers in a while, or we're keeping it non-spoiler for now.
Okay, cool.
And this will be coming out as your film is released. So this isn't being released until your film's released. But when did you get the idea? Another question I love to get out of the way early, because I'm sure it's your most over-asked question. But when did the idea first percolate for you for Wolf?
I've been a huge fan of David Fincher's and Alfred Hitchcock's and all of their films. And I love detective stories, and I love like building a riddle for an audience to solve. And like, I'm such a fan of Zodiac, and John Douglas's book, like all of his books, but Mindhunter particularly, and just like understanding human behavior. Like when you're tracking a killer, you have to kind of break down what their thinking is, and it's exactly what you do as a director. So there is this like wonderful fusion of understanding human pathology and the behavioral sciences. That's all I've been doing since childhood, is looking at people and seeing how they act. And so I find that to be very interesting in the course of an investigation. And so I always knew I wanted to do that with this film. And then I wanted to do something that would be a fun like monster creature feature that would be this werewolf with this like crazy costume. And then it just kind of happened where we did all the research of what it takes to understand when you're entering into a genre, you have to know that genre just as well as the fans do. And so we studied the werewolf myth and kind of what that is. It's this guy who has this, breakdown once a month because of something that he's not in control of. And then he regrets it. And it's like a perfect fusion with alcoholism. And I was like, all right, cool. You could do that. I've never seen that before, of like a fusion of an alcoholic and a werewolf, and the like Sunday scaries of like regret of what you did the night before. And so then that came about, but the twist at the end of the film, the kind of reveal, the biological reveal.
And don't say it yet, obviously.
I won't say it, but it's so dope. And it was just such a cool idea that I was like, this could be a wonderful fusion. This could be a wonderful thing to have in 70 minutes into a horror movie. And, so as soon as we had the idea for that, I was like, cool, this is now a movie, and this is too good to not make.
Well, let's talk about your habit for a second. I mean, obviously outlining to some writers is important. How important is outlining to you when you sit down to write?
Yeah, it's everything. So like that's writing to me. When I write the scenes, it's actually me standing up and acting out every scene and then writing down the best improv. I'm not a very good screenwriter in that sense, where like I don't sit in a cafe with headphones and hear voices in my head and write it down. I have to get it on its feet, and we do that purposefully to understand the full complications of physicalizing a scene. And so you're able to, mine good physical comedy and emotionality, delete dialogue, things like that like add to subtlety and the craft that is making the movie. And so really like, I guess we just did, my habit in making movies is just outlining and researching extensively, and then knowing the outline through the reminders app on the iPhone. I'll just write out every scene, and then you can move them around. And then eventually you're able to just like screen grab that and be like, cool, that's the outline for the screenplay. And then we start acting out all of those scenes and writing them down. And then that becomes the screenplay.
Okay. So wait, the reminders app?
Yeah. So it's you can have it as an app on a laptop or a computer, and then you can also sync to your phone. So if you have an idea for a scene, you can just write it down. And then if that shouldn't be there, you can kind of move them around in a nice way. And then eventually that becomes the layout for the script. And then that becomes how we write.
Microsoft recently, they bought an app called Wunderlist, and they retitled it as To Do, and it's a free app, and it syncs up, and it's actually the same thing, in which it's this long to-do list. The interesting thing is you could punch into each item and then write other things underneath it if you were doing film structure. So that's interesting, but I've never heard somebody use the reminder list. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's how I do it.
How long do you give yourself for that outlining process to find out your structure before you sit down to write?
When I'm really excited about something, I get very manic about it, of like, oh, I'm just going to stay up all night and do it. I haven't done that in a year or two, but like that has been such a process. And now I work with a co-writer, PJ McCabe, my good buddy, and we'll do it where it's like we'll have the outline for the thing. We'll do a broad outline in the reminders app and kind of talk through what it's going to be. And then we use Writer Duet or Celtec's screenwriting software. And he sits on one side of a table and I sit on the other side of the table. And then we just kind of crawl through the movie where we can see each other's work and kind of make each other laugh. And so that's a really fun, effective way of doing it. But yeah, I don't know anybody else who's been doing it this way. It's just the only way that I've been able to make it work for myself. And it's been working out.
Would you say it's like a week or a month to get your outline on Snow?
So with that one, it was a weird one. So like I wrote it manically over like a week and a half in the summer of 2016. So it was like right after Thunder. This is before I wrote the Thunder Road feature. I had the idea and I was like, oh,
Really?
this is so cool. And I wrote it out and I wrote the whole thing and I was like, this could be a really fun movie. And then it took a long time to get anybody to take it seriously. By that time, we were still just short filmmakers. We didn't have a feature under our belts. And so it took me a long time, and then running a Kickstarter campaign to make the Thunder Road feature, to then have anybody take us seriously. So by the time we were going to these festivals and meeting people in Hollywood, we had a script that was ready to go, and Orion Classics was like, yeah, let's go for it. But to answer your question, that one's a really roundabout way. With Thunder Road, I had the idea in December of 2016 to write that, and I spent the next 5 days in my buddy PJ's basement drinking, Budweiser and listening to Springsteen, and then that became the first draft of that script. So like, it really depends on the project. And then like the werewolf movie, like Wolf of Snow Hollow, we ended up writing that, and then we were going into production with it. And I was like, okay, well now it has to be absolutely incredible. And so I went to this like smokehouse in Virginia, this like tiny cabin in Virginia, and spent a week and a half writing the final draft of that there. It really depends on the project.
That's wild. And just for our listeners, how much did you raise through Kickstarter? Because I actually can't remember.
Yeah,
for Thunder Road.
We raised about $34,000, and then that became this crazy commercial for us. Where once I think we were only asking for $10,000 for like the startup funds to be able to make it. We raised $34,000 from the public, very kind people, and then as soon as we were able to do that, we had strangers from the internet from around the world reach out to buy percentages of the movie because the campaign had closed. So like they couldn't back the project anymore, but they were like, hey, I want to see this movie. I want to be a part of it. How can I help? So that became its own kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy of how you can make movies and how we were able to.
How much did you eventually raise?
The full budget of the movie was about $190,000. So like, I put up $50,000 of my own money, and my producer, Zach Parker, was also one of the executive producers. And then with the 34 that we had, we were able to kind of like gap finance the movie. But we shot it for nothing, basically. We shot it in the Airbnb that we were renting for the month in Austin.
Right.
Yeah, it's like a very shoestring budget. Like that, the police station is actually a warehouse that just has the word police put up because our production designer was like, if we just put the word police there, it would look like a police station. And it looks great. You'd never know.
When you sit down to write, how many hours do you write per day, or do you give yourself a page count that you like to hit?
It's usually based on my tiredness. Like I'll come in hot and like have a Red Bull or coffee and then work. And I do my best writing at night, which is difficult because I don't really sleep too well these days. And so because of that, finding the time to do the thing and become excited at that, in the evening is very difficult for me. But when I have an idea that's like incredible or could be incredible, I'll just go for 5 or 6 hours and just keep going until I can't do it anymore, and then wake up the next morning and do the exact same thing again.
How long did it take you to get your first draft of Wolf?
I think the first draft was about 5 or 6 days. So like probably 5 days. Yeah. Cause I had the idea in the same, J.K. Rowling talks about that, of like the idea for the first Harry Potter coming to her all at once. And then she just had to like go at it. She didn't really like do a treatment or an outline or something. With that one, it was like, cool, we have the ending for the thing. Let's work backwards. And then that's kind of all I had to do. It was like, okay, cool. I'd already done all this research about the police because of the Thunder Road short film and like sheriff's departments. And so I had a rough understanding. And then before we were going into production, I had to do more research to make it even more realistic so that when we physicalized the movie, it would be on point. But yeah, probably like 5 days, dude, not long for a first draft. And then I send it out to the producers and to like the hive mind that is like these creatives that I work beside. And they, Vanishing Angle is this incredible company that has, 7 directors on it who are all rostered and they're all incredible. And so I could reach out to any one of them and say, hey, would you take a look at this thing? It's a kind of a community and a family affair. So it's nice to be able to have that to rely on just by email.
Then how many drafts would you say it went through after that first draft once you got hive mind notes to become the film that we realized?
I was always adding to it. Like there was
Okay.
never like when you go on set, it's like, cool, this is the white draft and this is the pink and like that's the thing. But we never really were changing it. We didn't have the time. Like it was like, cool, we're rushing to get what's on the page. Like
So would you say your first draft really kind of represents the movie? Or there
no,
wasn't a second big rewrite period?
no. Because no, there was a bunch. There was probably like 4 or 5 in total, but it was based off of who became involved in the project. So like my first draft was due to a digital company that was like involved in the beginning, and then we were able to sell it to a larger to Orion Classics, and then they came in with a few notes, and XYZ had good notes, but it was never like before I said, cool, this is the draft that we're going to shoot, it was just suggestions of like, what if we slowed this down? What if we like fused these two scenes together? Small stuff that made the movie better and not just different. But so it was just kind of this thing that lived on a digital file on my desktop that I was able to change in real time. And then Natalie and Matt and Ben, our producers, were able to access that and see how that was changing the production budget and things like that. And then it was just like a constant conversation back and forth between the producers and me, where it's like, cool, we actually don't have the time to shoot this other scene. Can we cut the scene? Yes, we can cut this scene. It's like 1,000 little things.
That makes
like
sense.
That. Yeah.
Was there anything after your experience of Thunder Road that informed Wolf that you wanted to go back and rewrite, having been through a full feature, since you wrote Wolf, then went off and did Thunder Road, and then came back to Wolf?
Yeah. So The Wolf of Snow Hollow is like far more conventionally edited than Thunder Road. Thunder Road is like several long takes that then have 2 montages in between them, basically, or it feels that way. And then The Wolf of Snow Hollow is like Zodiac as a comedy, so it kind of had to have a lot more montage and sequence editing so that it flowed for audience entertainment. And so that was something that I learned in the edit process and in the production process of Thunder Road, the feature, that I didn't necessarily have those skills beforehand. And like, yeah, it's neat to be able to watch Scorsese movies now, and they just fly. They're just like 1,000 shots, or like Magnolia, it just flies by. It's really neat. It's like seeing that and kind of like applying my knowledge of feature film production into this one, I definitely took that into the screenplay of like, okay, cool, this is how you do this.
What was your process for writer's block? If you got it, how do you handle it? How do you battle it? If you get it, not all writers do.
I mean, the thing for me is I've never really had it. I've written stuff that sucked, and then I was like, okay, this sucks. It has to be better. But I do like vomit drafts quickly. We call them vomit drafts, where it's like, okay, you just get it out onto the page. And that's incredibly helpful. You make it better. But really, for me, I'm lucky in that we write stuff that we know that we can make. It's never like writing stuff that is, the space opera or whatever. It's always like small town stuff. So I'm always writing with production in mind of like how we're going to shoot this in the backyard rather than, on a Hollywood backlot or whatever. And so that really helps to inform what is possible in my mind. So I don't really have writer's block generally. I'm usually able to get the thing out on the page.
That's great. Many writers hearing that are jealous of you now.
Are furious.
That's awesome. One of the things a director does pre-production is scout. And so
Yeah.
what was your scout like finding the locations where you were going to shoot Wolf?
Yeah. I moved to Utah 2 months before we were scheduled to shoot. So I moved to Utah in the beginning of January. We were supposed to start shooting on March 6th. And I drove all over with our location team, and we found places that were perfect. There were places where it was like, and kind of unexpected. We were staying in a town called Colville, Utah, which is outside of Park City. It's about like 20 minutes outside of Park City. And so we knew the neighborhood kind of because we had been to Sundance a couple of years. And it was nice to see that. But Park City is like it's like a metropolis. It's like a nicer part of town. We wanted to shoot it in this kind of rural, more farmland. And so we shot it in Colville and Camas and Samak, these kind of like neighboring towns. And we just went out, man. We went out like in cars and just drove all over every street. We did Google Maps and like dropped the pin of where we can see. We did like digital scouting as well. We got on Craigslist, we got on Airbnb, we got on all of these apps to find pictures of insides of homes to be able to find the right stuff. We had a great locations team of people who would go out and find trailers for, we're trying to find like where this killer would live and things like that. But yeah, it took 8 weeks to just get everything. And even when we were in production, we still didn't have a place. So we would be like shooting all day and then going to scout another location with the whole camera team that night. So it was like incredibly hectic sometimes. So like, we don't have a place to shoot on Friday and it's Wednesday. And I'm the only person, me and Natalie Kingston, the cinematographer, the only people that can advise as to whether or not it's a functional place to shoot.
So you had a long pre-production stage to be able to scout all that, obviously.
Yeah, and we were in pre-production. We were in prep by November. Like the studio said, pretend like we're going to finance this thing, and we're like, all right, let's go for it. It's crazy.
Well, so obviously you had your locations, and talk about the casting of Robert Forster in one of his final roles. It was great casting. He played the part well. Well, how difficult was it for you as your second feature to work with a legend like that?
Yeah, I was incredibly lucky. It was kind of a Hail Mary when we sent the script to him. One of our producers, Matt Miller, had worked with him on a film called Too Late that he was also a producer on. And so we thought that it was possible. He'd worked with Matt. He knew Matt. And we were probably like 5 weeks out before shooting. So we were already in Utah when we sent him the script. We're like, oh, man, it could be good if he reads it. And he read it and loved it and was like, absolutely, let's figure out how I can do it. And he came out and he was there for the first few weeks of production and was just such a champ, man. Like it was such a neat experience to work with him. Obviously, like the film industry has completely changed since he started doing stuff. And he had written and directed and acted in a movie before. So like, he had been in my shoes as a young man. And so it was nice. He was such a fan of Thunder Road and like just was constantly raving about it and like, making me feel so welcome and was so loving and thoughtful, and was also just that kind of dad that he is in the movie. Like we had that relationship on set so often. It was like Indiana Jones and Sean Connery, kind of like that was our relationship on set, and was just such a gentleman to everybody in the cast and crew. Everybody looked up to him. And it's so funny. I'm so glad that we got him in the film. He like kills it in the movie. He's so funny and so sad and dramatic and American. It's a really, really wonderful part.
What'd you find interesting about seeing his process as an actor? Were there any things that he did as an actor that you're like, ooh, you know what? I'm going to hold on to that. That's interesting.
He was very structured. So like he would come in and he wanted to know the business of like, the set where he is. So like we built the office. Charlie Texter and the art team did a great job of building that, police station, the sheriff's department, and his office particularly is like fly fishing stuff behind him. And he like is in the space. And so he wanted to get in and kind of understand what he was doing and the computer and how he actually as a character lived inside of the space. So in that sense, like he was such a pro with that, of like being able to know what the business was going to be for him throughout the day. So when he looked up at the clock, he knew where it was and things like that. Yeah, and then his work ethic was just kind of unmatched on set. He was just very particular of making sure that it was great and making sure that it was going to be everything that I needed in the edit. And yeah, man, he was just such an expert, man, in a way that I'm not. I come across as like this goofy, caffeinated, lunatic on set, and he was just very much like, all right, we're gonna do the thing. Let's get ready. Everybody good? All right, let's go for it. It was really fun.
Well, really, really briefly, just before we get into the spoilers, give us the selling it and development story. You said that you got the script to Matt Miller, who's one of your producers. How did you end up getting it set up with Orion Classics?
Yeah, so the company of film producers that I'm at is called Vanishing Angle. I'm an executive there of creative development, but really I'm a director, and they have been with me since the beginning. So like they have kind of chaperoned my work for the last 6 years, and people always say, "Oh, you got to get your script to a producer." Like these are just buddies of mine that happen to be the best film production company in Los Angeles, as far as I'm fucking concerned. And so like I can just send them something like, cool, this is great. We can bring this out to these different people and see what happens. we were having our big meeting at MGM at Orion Classics, and Matt and I were there on time, but parked next to the other building. So it was actually about 3 blocks away, and we're in suits and loafers, these like dress shoes, and we realized we're going to be late for this meeting, probably one of the most important meetings of our lives. And we have to sprint in dress shoes through Beverly Hills. And it was such a cliche of like getting greenlit by the big studio, kid. It was that kind of shit. And we go in, we're all sweaty. I'm like, okay, thank you. Yes, I'll take a water. Thank you so much. Like, we're all just like in this big boardroom. And that's when they said, yeah, let's do the thing. I want to do it. And we kind of like came up with how the movie would be. And they got all clearances from the higher ups, and we said, yeah, let's go for it. It felt like, then we left the building and I was like, I think we're making a movie. I think now we're actually going to do the thing. And we texted each other the picture of Wes Anderson and Luke Wilson, or Owen Wilson, jumping for joy after getting greenlit to do Bottle Rocket.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love Bottle Rocket. That's actually been on my rewatch list this quarantine, and I have not had time for it. I love that movie so much.
It's a fun one. Yeah.
That and Rushmore. Okay, what was your budget and schedule? Like, what did they greenlit you at?
Yeah, so we made the movie for around 10 times the budget of Thunder Road. So it was like the most money that I had ever had to work with. But as soon as you make a movie at that level where you're lighting outdoor scenes at night, you need huge equipment to be able to do that. It's not like a backyard movie. My buddy Benjamin Wiesner says it's the equivalent of taking an aircraft carrier to the grocery store. Of like every small thing becomes enormous just because of how many people there are involved.
So it was about 1.3 million, is what you're saying?
Probably like no. It was probably about 1.8, maybe 1.9.
Okay.
But yeah, it was huge. It was like a crazy thing that I was able to steer this giant ship. And then yeah, it was just like 1,000 different things that come up with that of like, okay, well, how bloody do we want this to be? Do we need 10 buckets of blood because we can get it? And it's like, okay, well, that's great. And like, we get to do all the fun stuff of having these enormous fans push fake snow on all of the characters. And then you're in this thing. And if you only look in one direction, it looks so real. And then as soon as you turn around, it's like 1,000 fans and stuff, and the whole cast and crew. Yeah, man, it was a dream to be able to make stuff that big, and hopefully it's just the beginning. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Well, podcast listeners and people watching this on YouTube at the Backstory Magazine channel, which we've started during the quarantine, this is definitely the place where we're getting into spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie, you could go rent it, see it immediately. Please go see it. And then press pause and then come back, because we're going to be getting into the spoilers and kind of the really fine-tuning stuff behind the scenes about the movie. So you have been warned. Spoilers are coming up. So obviously there's a big spoiler here. We're jumping all the way ahead to the ending. It's really not a werewolf movie. It's exactly, rooted in reality, where there's a psychopath in a wolf costume, a wolf fetishist, if you will. When did that arrive? When did that idea arrive for you? Because it seems like you probably did a lot of reverse engineering to cover your tracks, which was actually part of the fun of watching the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about that a lot, of like Jaws and hiding the shark and what that means for audiences. But then with this one, because of the ending that we have, we kind of have to show the shark in the beginning. So the audience is like, oh yeah, to then make the reveal of the shark at the end, not really being a shark, hit harder. I am such a fan of John Douglas's books about tracking serial murderers and what the real cost of that is for a community and a family who are the victims of violent crime, that it just spoke to me. I was like, okay, well, this could be such an interesting thing to do, to talk about how conspiracy theories and misinformation really corrupt a community, and how much bullshit and just how difficult it is to fight that in a small town or amongst any groups of people, and how reason and rationality don't end up making it to the big screen too often. One of my favorite movies is a film called Les Diaboliques. It's a French movie where
excellent movie.
Yeah, same kind of thing, where it's like it's this ghost that is tracking this person. You realize there's this entire alternate motive that's happening with a wonderful reveal at the end. But the thing that John Douglas taught me, and the thing that a lot of David Fincher movies, specifically Zodiac, teaches me, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a monster. Your neighbor is just as bad, and like that's far more frightening to me. And it's weird to know that people are going to see this movie, and statistically, if you're in a movie theater or like 3 movie theaters full of people, one of those persons has assisted in a murder, which is just a crazy thing to think about. Like,
possibly even on this Zoom call right now.
see, you never know. You never know. But really terrifying. And so, like, I really wanted to make something that would be spooky. And the reveal at the end is such a wonderfully big Hitchcockian thing where I was like, okay, cool. I get to do this, like, the Hitchcock stuff that I love so much and I miss so much in this genre and in cinema in general. That I was like, okay, cool. This is the next thing that I have to do. If they're going to let me do a werewolf movie, it also has to be this thing. Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was an awesome reveal. I sat up. I was having a blast with it.
Okay, cool. Oh, cool.
I obviously love backstories. So tell me kind of what you think the backstory is for the murderer. I mean, I like that he's a taxidermist. That was like, good for the genre. But it seems like, if I'm remembering right, they said in the movie, I think they said there hadn't been a murder in 2 years in town. If I'm remembering right, is that right?
It's a murder once every 2 years, generally.
Yeah. So I mean, like, how do you think he paces himself as to when he murders, and where does the werewolf fetishism fall in with this guy?
Yeah. So when you look at some serial killers who go off on strings with long pauses in them, like Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, he would have a long patch of non-murdering people because he was married. And his wife caught him doing the asphyxiation masturbation and realized he had all of these strange kinks while there were all these murders that were happening in Wichita. And there was one moment where his wife was watching the news and she said, "Oh, that letter, that handwriting looks like yours." And immediately he's thinking, "Oh my," it's funny in retrospect, but it's like immediately he's thinking he's going to get caught for these murders. And he could have. And so he had to lay low for about 6 years. And so there's a long, long stretch of him not killing people. But then there are some cases like Son of Sam where it starts to get into the news, and the news then inspires somebody to go out and shoot more or kill more people, and how pervasive that can be in a small town like this. Jack the Ripper was the same way. Sorry, this is such a long...
No, it's all good. Okay. I love this.
So Jack the Ripper, what happened was there was a string of murders in Whitechapel, all women and all at night, and their guts are taken out and strung over them in this like brutal way. And then they get a letter to the newspaper called the Dear Boss letter, and it's very finely written, and it's like beautiful layout. And he says at the bottom, Jack the Ripper, and it's sent to the head of a newspaper group. And then 2 weeks later, this guy who's set up this small town investigation unit named George Lusk gets a letter called the Lusk letter, and it is just murderous looking. It's got a kidney inside of it, and it's terrible handwriting and terrible grammar. And it says, "I'm the guy who killed those people. Here's a bit of liver for you, or kidney. I ate some of it and doused it in wine." And so what happened was, the real killer, the guy who wrote the Lusk letter, saw somebody else taking credit for it in the news, and then was like, "Oh no, I'm going to write my own letter. I'm going to try and impersonate that." So serial killers really do work in this weird fusion with the media and how they're perceived. It's all ego. It's all strange. Anyway, long story short,
yes. Getting back to your character, sir.
For the wolf in this one, with a backstory had to be that he was somebody who was building something that had to be ready. So as soon as he was able to build this thing fully, the outfit, then he would probably go out and do it. But then it's also based on obviously their hatred of women. It's always the women are always the victims in this thing, and so he has this terrible relationship with his wife, who then leaves him, or we don't find out what happens. Where he mentions her, right. And he has this stressful thing with his ex-wife. In the same way that the main character, that my character does, he has this stress with his ex-wife. They get along in that respect. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what the backstory would be
Okay.
for this
I mean,
guy,
that's okay too.
but in dealing with the performer who plays the killer, we had these long form conversations about serial killers constantly, and we were like, he probably would have killed prior in an uglier way, or maybe he's just pent up in this thing, and the oncoming winter fused with the fact that he was able to finish the uniform is like, cool, now every full moon I'm going to do this thing. Screw this town. I'm better than all of this.
I mean, it seems like it's a wolf attack in the movie. What were some of the tools that in your mind he was using to really go at people?
Yeah. So in building the uniform, it had to be something that was, if you look at it one way, it has to be a functioning werewolf, and then to be able to have the mouth you could look out of, like all of that stuff functioned for the uniform as well, for the costume. Where like it could be something that somebody could go out and do right now if they wanted to, which is really scary. But then, yeah, we had, razor blades on the claws and small things like that would make it easier to be able to remove organs, female organs from somebody in a short period of time and then make it away. And that's kind of what these fetishistic necrophiles do. People who use severed hands to masturbate and things like that. If you want to stay up at night, go to the fetishistic necrophile chapter of Wikipedia. You'll have a lot of fun there. It's like an Ambien; it'll put you right to sleep. But yeah, what a lot of these guys do is do that. They find ways to be able to get in and out as quickly as possible. And Jack the Ripper would have been the same way, or whoever wrote the Lust Letter.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick just to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You could test drive us by reading our free issue in case you never have. And I got to say, it's been really easy to have a film magazine during the pandemic. So if you would like to support us during this extremely easy time, please go to backstory.net, become a subscriber. I'll even tell you could use discount code SAVE5 to save you $5. And that'll get you everything you need over there at backstory.net. You could read us on a desktop, on a laptop. You could also read our iPad app, which is my favorite way to do it. But you have to use the discount code at backstory.net, and then your credentials you could use to log in on an iPad if you want, or you could just read us on a desktop, laptop, no problem. And there's a lot of cool stuff that we have in store for you in the future. We keep putting new articles into whatever our current issue is, even though those are then moved out sometimes into our latest issue when we publish that. So that is what we're doing with issue 42. For instance, I'll just tell you this because I know you were going to ask. We wrote this amazing 6,000 word Watchmen article during the Emmy season. And it's been sitting there in issue 41, our current issue, but it's actually a part of issue 42 officially. So when we publish issue 42, which is our long delayed pandemic issue, it's going to be in there. And so it's going to be in there, but it doesn't matter because you're going to have access to every single issue when you become a subscriber. And when I say every single issue, I mean every single issue that we have online. So we're on issue 42 coming out soon. Our archive currently goes back to about issue 30, and we're continuing to add older issues to our archive so that we could go all the way back to issue 1. But the act of doing old issues along with new issues at the same time, it's tricky, kids. It's tricky. But nonetheless, it's our goal. It's what we're doing. So you won't just be able to read the current issue. You'll be able to read our old stuff as well. Anyhow, that's the pitch. And I want to get back to this movie that we've been talking about this whole time, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, with writer, director, actor, and producer Jim Cummings. So let's get back right into that chat right now. It was good because you're covering your tracks the whole movie with werewolf mythology, debates about it. Your character is just cutting through it the whole time. So there's a lot of different angles as to what we think is going on, and something that's traditional in all of these movies and even in real life detective work is the red herring. And so for that, you have the drug addict, and he actually did murder someone in the movie. It just wasn't one of the werewolf murders. So when did you get that idea? And tell us about layering that in, because I thought it was a good red herring. It was a little confusing at first, but I know that was part of the path. So yeah. I that was welcome too.
Yeah. So there's a great story in I think it's John Douglas's. He talks about them planting so this is how they're trying to do this proactive investigation, not reactive investigation. They actually were trying to tease the serial killer out from the neighborhood. And what they did was they staged this photo shoot for a local newspaper to get onto the front page of the the younger sister of one of the victims placing a stuffed teddy bear onto the grave, knowing that it would tempt a serial killer to go out and get this teddy bear, which is kind of how they think. Super messed up. But in doing so, they planted recording devices around the grave and had a stakeout for a few nights. And the first night, they're hearing crying from inside of the cemetery. And they're like, this is our guy. And they race up to him and arrest him. And it turns out he was crying at another grave because he had run away in a hit and run and killed somebody many years before and was visiting the grave and crying and apologizing. So it's like, it's not unheard of that there are more murderers in this town. Yeah. And like, I thought that would have been weird to be like, oh yeah, no, this is a strange thing. It happens all the fucking time. And it's really spooky. And yeah, most of these serial killers end up dying on their own accord. The vast majority, a third of serial killer death is suicide. Or they end up going to prison and dying in prison for another charge.
But there's also a large amount that aren't even caught, sadly. So that's the other problem. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, Golden State Killer, his libido went away, and so because of that, had no reason to go out and kill anymore. And so yeah, he would have disappeared had it not been for FBI and DNA evidence.
Was it difficult for you to decide how much to give us on the drug guy? Because you do cut away a couple times. You show him burning a body, so I could see like you probably debating, is it too much? Is it enough? Is it too little?
I mean, with that one, it's more of a comedy thing of like, we have a butt that's like in a big burn pile. And it's like, how much of the butt do we show? And like, how much blood do we show? And then you realize how fucked up you are being on set debating this. You're like, this is my job. Like, I have to decide how much ass crack to show of this poor victim. And it's freezing cold. The sun's going down. You're doing this thing. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to weaving that needle, threading that needle of like where the audience is going to be on the roller coaster, that's a constant back and forth of like, and also in the edit, you're watching and you're like, all right, how many frames of this do we show? Is that too much? Are we holding too long? Are we making it too important? Small things like that.
That makes sense. You were talking about comedy a second ago. One of the things that you did really well was you infused the film with comedy. So yes, there's gory murders, and yes, you're getting like a genre tone, but you had a very kind of also whimsical nature. I mean, a few times you had the kind of animated acting and camera style of something like Raising Arizona, which I always love. And so talk about infusing comedy into this serious serial killer drama as well, because that was really welcomed and made the film actually really entertaining to watch, I got to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I always say that if you don't make jokes throughout your movies, your audiences will. And it's so true. Like, I grew up watching movies with just some of the best insult comic buddies in the world. And so like the whole time there's this ongoing, mystery science theater background of like funny jokes coming up from friends. And if you're not putting that stuff into the movies, your audience is going to. So I was like, all right, well, let's ride that roller coaster and kind of like tease the audience with the detective pornography narrative, and then also be able to make these fun character comedy jokes throughout. I think that's so important. Like, you look at something like The Burbs, Joe Dante's movie, and it is an out-and-out comedy, but it is structured like a detective story or like a Twilight Zone episode. It's like this really spooky thrill about neighbors and neighborliness and with the suburbs and all of those problems that come with it, psychology of that, but it's all kind of chock full of these goofy characters and jokes that function so well. I don't know. I think that is so important. Otherwise, if you don't have that levity, it's so easy to turn it off. It becomes like a Denis Villeneuve. It becomes Prisoners, and it's like, all right, well, I want to make Prisoners as a fucking comedy, and like it has to be that.
One of the things on Red Herrings that I forgot to ask about, at what point you pull out one of your own teeth kind of randomly. And I was like, are they going with the cop who's investigating the murders, who's blacking out drunk now that he's a relapsed alcoholic? Is he possibly like a werewolf if we're going to go genre here? So when did that idea come along? Because I thought that was a nice touch. Yeah,
I love that. So like in the trailer, the most upvoted comment on the trailer is like, wow, big whoop, the sheriff is the werewolf, end of story. And like everybody on YouTube is like, yeah, it's probably that. And it's going to be so great for them to see the movie, or everybody see the movie, like, yeah, you had no fucking clue. But yeah, no, that was super important. Like, the movie's about a werewolf, and it's about this guy who like does something stupid once a month and then regrets it. It's like, that's an alcoholic. That is exactly what, being in AA is all about, and like being able to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and change your life. And so that was part of the DNA of the project of like, if you're gonna tell the story of the werewolf, you have to show every part. You have to use every part of the buffalo. And yeah, that was super important to us throughout the whole movie.
I like the love story aspect. It was kind of nice. And sometimes movies get clouded or muddied down if they try and lean into it too hard. But, you're always showing that there's this other character that is very mindful of him and is, funny enough, smarter than him and a more diligent, detective than him. And you're just kind of layering it in. I'm curious if there was ever more to it, or if that's what there was, because it was nice to see them together in the end.
Yeah.
It just made me wonder what else there was to it.
Yeah, there was a great moment that we had to cut that I really loved, but then everybody watching the movie is like, "Oh, I'm glad you cut that." But there was a moment where she tries to reach out to me. I'm kind of emotional and I'm leaving. It's New Year's Eve and I'm saying goodbye, and she grabs me by the thigh and then has this like talking to with me, and it's very emotional. It's exactly what you see. There's a great story of Anthony Hopkins when he decided to go to AA, and he's been in the program ever since. But it was the 1970s. He's a young, talented actor and drinking too much, parked his car in the middle of the street, all kinds of crazy stuff. And his wife, one night after a horrible spell that Anthony was on, he drives her to the airport so she can fly back overseas. And he says, "I think I just lost my wife. I think I just screwed up my life. I think I just did this. I think I have a problem." And he went to AA that evening. I think that was his first time. And so we wanted to do something like that to like show what rock bottom is for this guy. And there was a line that we cut where Ricky leans in and says this bit to try and get me, to inspire me to change my life. And she says, "If you want to be sheriff, how about you start acting like one?" And I go, "Yeah, how about you get your hand off my thigh?" And it was this moment where it was like, oh my God. And she kind of like leans back fully in the chair, and she's like terrified of the monster that I've become giving into the drink. And I loved it. I was like, oh my God, this would be such a great thing. And then everybody was like, "Oh, you lose complete likability." Like, and I was like, well, he's an alcoholic. This is what happens. Like, this is what the people act like. And we had to change it. But now it's just him getting out of the car normally. And then when it comes to that, like it was kind of this platonic love story. It's these two people who work together and they're never overly affectionate, but that's kind of how it is. Like, when you're working with somebody who you happen to love a lot. Yeah.
I love the state mortician autopsy guy, and just really briefly, because I still have other questions. Like his line is kind of basically, he snuck out and he was maybe doing detective work on his own because he was so unimpressed, and then he throws the bottle at them. Is that why he throws the bottle? Because that whole thing just cracked me up.
I think he's just pissed at them. Like, I think he's just pissed at John and knew that he would get away with throwing the bottle. And he definitely did. Like, so that was just, John has become such a good detective of this stuff. He's like, and that's become such a small part of the movie earlier on. And then this guy is acting like vengeful and angry in this meeting. And then he goes, "You threw that bottle at us." And then he's so taken aback that he goes, "No, I didn't." And it's like, that's not what somebody who's innocent says. They would say, right. "What bottle?" Yeah. What are you talking about? And I don't know. I just wanted it to be like John has actually become a great detective, even though all signs point otherwise.
Yeah. During production, it was interesting that you decided not to show the murders for the most part on screen, because that would have been more expensive. Of course, it's budgetary, and it's good in Hitchcockian to cut away from it, obviously. Was there ever any plans to show anything more graphic that you couldn't afford? Was there something like that you had to cut off paper because you couldn't shoot it that you really wanted to do?
No, there was moments where it was like, oh, it'd be cool to see Chavez get murdered. The guy Demetrius Daniels plays him, and I was like, oh, that we don't see whatever happens to him, and that would be an interesting thing. Or like see Gutierrez get killed. That would be neat. But like, really, for the most part, it was supposed to be that way. Like Seven, I think the only murder you see in Seven is the ending. Is like John Doe gets killed.
Right, because they're on the crime scenes the rest of the movie. Yeah. Yeah.
So the majority of the look of detectives' lives is coming up on a dead body. That's it. Like the vast majority, you never see any of the murders. You never, it's always like trying to break down the crime scene. And so because of that, I kind of wanted to put that in the mind of, put the audience in the mind of the detectives.
That makes sense. What was it like writing your action on the page? How detailed are you on your page for action?
Um, Pretty detailed, especially with stuff like this, like for reveals. I try and keep it as low as possible just for page count reasons. And then like in talking with the actors in rehearsal, we'll just do it 1,000 times. And like I already have an idea of how it's going to be. And so because of that, um, or like I have an idea of how to physicalize it, and it's so much easier to do it in person than it is on the page. So it's like very simple unless it's something very important to the story. So like any of the reveals that you have to like define perfectly. Yeah, that stuff is important to define, but then the rest of it is.
What was your page count?
I think it was 91.
Oh wow. Okay, that's lean. That's great.
Yeah, I think so. The last movie that we made was 91. My producer Ben Wiesner is like, just write 100-page script. Like we'll cut it down, but I just need like we end up doing so much stuff afterwards, like needing stuff in the edit. So just like write it 100 pages and we'll cut it out in the edit.
What was your shoot schedule? How many days did you have? I don't think I asked earlier.
We shot for 23 days.
Oh wow. Okay.
Which is the longest we've ever had. Thunder Road was 14 and a half. So like very lean.
Wow. Yeah.
And with this one, it still felt rushed. Like the way that we were shooting the movie, the camera team, it took a long time to get to the first shot, and it took a long time to get every shot in the movie, just because of the nature of where we were shooting, how we were shooting, the style of the movie. It took forever, and so because of that, we had to cut stuff. It's just the nature of making stuff this level.
How many cameras did you have?
Single camera. Camera.
Okay.
Yeah. We had a body for another one, I want to say, but we only used that one.
How many, as a director, how important is pre-visualization? So shot lists, storyboards, things like that? Or is it something that once you do your location scout, you're kind of able to say, oh, okay, when we're here, this is where I'm going to place the camera, and you kind of know in advance that way?
This one and Thunder Road were both rigorously shot listed. This one even more so. So working with Natalie Kingston, the way that she likes to work and insists on working is like getting as much data as possible beforehand. And so like for this one, it was so important to do that because we're pulling 50 people up a mountain in the snow at 14 degrees all night. And so it's like, we better know exactly what's going to be in frame at all times. And so for some of the larger set pieces, like the climax, or rather the like hookup Brock truck, shooting stuff, that stuff was all done. That stuff was all done on paper. So Danny Madden, our creative director, helped us to build these like simple storyboards that we put into Premiere and kind of edited and did a little bit of that on set. But that was only for like the big action scenes. That was only stuff where it was like it has to move a certain way.
Wait, I love hearing about different workflows. Were these hand drawn storyboards that you then put into Premiere and edited?
Yeah.
You had a storyboard artist draw them, and then you just kind of put them together as montages.
Yeah, so Danny Madden, who is a director, he made Beast and Euphonia and a bunch of other short animation stuff. He's one of my best friends, and I've known him for 15 years or whatever. And very luckily, when he comes onto one of my projects, he's an incredible illustrator. He like does all kinds of illustrations because he started out doing hand-drawn animation. And so there were times where he would be in the room with us, and he'd be able to mock up stuff that we were asking for, and just have it on printer paper. And then we were able to like screen grab that on a phone, take pictures of it on a phone, and then bring it into Premiere and move it around with like music and stuff, just to kind of see how it flowed.
That's awesome. Was there anything that you needed to rewrite while you were shooting? Because you're obviously the star, the director, but the writer too. So sometimes that happens. There
were moments where as soon as we knew the speed with which the crew and the team moved, it became something of like, okay, we're at the top of this mountain. It's an hour and a half away drive. And there's this scene that we were going to shoot basically during lunch during this other time with a B unit. Should we do that and then push the Hannah death even farther? Or do we realize that we're going to be in this parking lot for 15 hours and not subject the crew to that and maybe shoot it another time? And there were times where like we would just kept on pushing this scene, and it was like, well, do we really need it? And then we had the two other scenes that were on other sides of it that bookended it. And we were able to edit that together and say, yeah, we probably don't. And then we just had to move on. But all of that was just production restraints. That was just, okay, we're not going to be able to do that. There was a time where we were trying to shoot a flashback scene, and I had to wrap two actors who were there on set, and we never shot their scene. And it was brutal. It was like, oh my God, it was terrible. But that's just the nature of moving. That's just the nature of making the thing. Some things fall through the cracks.
I respected that you were shooting like while it was snowing. I thought that was cool. So you were dealing with the weather. What did you learn about working with the weather? Just ranging from difficulties that you could encounter in the camera department with temperatures and anything else you learned while shooting in the snow.
Yeah. It was really great. It was really fun to do. It was a nightmare constantly, but it was nice. Like the way we introduce Ricky Lindholm and Robert Forster is in a blizzard, and it was a real blizzard. It was like we're in this small town in Utah, and it happened to be blizzarding that day. And so it looks like this snow globe, and that authenticity would otherwise cost millions of dollars and like, enormous amounts of fake snow that we just didn't have. And so that was really cool to do. It was neat.
It's also dangerous though, right? Because if for some reason you don't get your coverage for the scene that you're shooting and the snow dies down, you're then going to have a matchback problem.
Yeah. So there were times where there was, I think, 3 shots in the movie where we added fake snow in the foreground to match snow in the background. My buddy Mike Cisneros is an incredible VFX artist. He has this whole team of people that worked on the film, and it was nice to kind of work hand in hand with him. Where I was terrified of like, cool, on the reverse shot, there's snow outside of the window, and then there's no snow on the other side, and it's like, oh my God, like this is just not going to work. But they were able to just pull out that part of the frame and then put snow behind it. It was we're really lucky. Yeah.
That's awesome. One of the other questions that I had for you was obviously editing is the last stage of storytelling, and it's a place where your film is reshaped. What were some of the lessons that you learned in editing, and what were some of the things that you hated to cut, but maybe it was a lesson you could share with us that made your film better for cutting?
I would say, there's a good story from a filmmaker buddy of mine who said he was making a studio movie, and he and the editor worked on it for several months and got it to a place that they loved. It was the script, it was the thing, and then it sucked. It still wasn't good, and the movie wasn't getting any better. It was just getting closer to that shared vision that they had, and so they had to bring in a new editor. And it was like, it sucks when you have like such a perfect pairing of like who. The first editor we're working with is my buddy Brett Thomas, who did a fantastic job, and he and I agreed so much on everything that was going to be this movie and the language of the movie. And then everybody that was watching it wasn't getting it, and it was like, okay, well, this isn't going to work. And so we brought on Patrick Barnes, who's also an editor at our company, and he just didn't give a shit about what we had in mind. He wasn't on set, didn't care at all, and that was so refreshing. It was like, okay, cool. I don't have to do that. I have to make it good. That's my orders. And then he and I worked together, and that's kind of what it needed to be. It needed to be this like 2-tier editing. And then we all kind of worked together with something that we're incredibly happy with. But yeah, it's a strange thing.
Was there something that you hated to cut that you really missed that you want to tell us about that would be like a deleted scene on a Blu-ray or something like that?
I mean, the one that we cut, the line of me saying, how about you get your hand off my thigh, I really loved, but that was like, and then everybody that I tell that story to, they're like, I'm glad that you didn't do that. It was really affectionate when you didn't have that. I was like, all right, cool. So I don't know. I mean, there was never really something that was crazy. There was the thing of like getting notes from the studio where they're like, this scene should be over here. And then it's like, well, if we do that, then that makes John a drunk earlier. Like, and then that means that it would there's like pulling threads at the sweater that kind of mismatch things. And so that's always a thing that you have to fight for. And so there were several times where I had to go into the studio, sometimes in person, to be like, you got to trust me on this thing. If we do that, we have to remove this thing. And this thing's really good. We shouldn't remove that. Like, Robert Forster smelling my breath is really important there. We can't move the alcohol later. And they're like, okay, cool. That makes sense. There's 1,000 little things like that.
Well, in that regard, one of the things that was interesting was you do a whole bunch of sequences that are nonlinear, in which they're they're doing one thing and you're also flashing back. Sometimes it's the murder, but actually sometimes it's a completely different piece of detective work, and the two are kind of coming together. How much of that was scripted versus discovered in the editing room?
That's all scripted. So like
Really? Okay.
there's a montage of me where I go to the library and I'm like looking through all these weird occult books about
Yeah, that's a great
werewolves,
one.
and then it's also me talking to my partner about the myth of the werewolf. So like that kind of fuses together of like, this is what I learned last night. And then it's also him going back to the first crime scene, which is important. The first crime scene with string killers, spray killers like this is so important. With Zodiac, he lived 50 yards from Darla, which is crazy. And that is such an important fact. I didn't realize this also. Sorry, I could talk about serial killers all day, but Arthur Lee Allen went to a college where there was also a murder several years earlier where a woman was murdered on the football field, and the local college newspaper or admissions office got a weird letter from the killer. If you had any doubt that the guy did it, that was it. But they like to do that. They like to, like, the first one is the most important thing because it's usually a proximity crime of like someone that the killer was close to anyway. But yeah, that whole sequence was very important of like having it be the kind of detective pornography that we love so much, of like finding clues with music and sequence and montage, all to end with this like goofy slapstick, me waking up having fallen asleep at the library. That was all in the DNA of the script, and that was the fun stuff.
Okay. And so the other ones too pretty much were scripted as well, the nonlinear flashbacks. All right.
Yeah, sure.
Well, so what I think the way that we always like to end is talking about your toughest scene. And so what was the toughest scene? Now I'm going to give you three options here, because the toughest scene as an actor, toughest scene as a writer, of course, and toughest scene as a director. It doesn't have to be the same one, but it's always great to hear how you solved the creative problem and how you got through it. So toughest scene as a writer, I guess, is the easiest place to start because you're not even on set.
The toughest scene as a writer, I would say so. Like having to do reshoots was always tough. Of like when you have these test screenings and people think that it's not it's too subtle, or like that it's not obvious enough as to what's happening, so that it's not fulfilling enough. It's difficult with the detective story of like with The Sixth Sense. How much do you show before you reveal the twist ending of The Sixth Sense? And so like that's always a back and forth. I would say having to do the rewrites where we would like do these small reshoots that are kind of like off-screen ADR to like clarify things, because I'm really bad at that. Like I write the thing and then I don't really think about, like, I'm imagining that the audience is going to be along the whole time and not like on their phone and distracted. You have to make it a slightly more obvious, which is infuriating. Like I'm such a fan of Mindhunter season 2, and they don't give you anything. It's like a really wonderful, subtle masterpiece. And so that was probably the most frustrating thing with writing. I never complain though. Like I think that this kind of thing, I guess difficulty, not frustrating, is most difficult. And then as an actor, the most difficult thing to do, I mean, I think just like the long takes and then not being able to see footage. I wasn't able to see footage until 4 days into the shoot. So it was like we just were so slow at getting stuff done. I wasn't able to watch playback. I wasn't able to see the frame basically unless I was holding the like satellite monitor.
Wait, why not?
Because we weren't moving fast enough. And if I asked for playback, that would mean that we were losing 3 or 4 minutes from getting the rest of the stuff that we needed to get that day.
So you were just at that point relying on your script supervisor to make sure the eye lines and everything else was right and stuff like that, and just moving on.
And everybody else behind the camera. So we don't have a script supervisor. Like usually we do single take coverage, so continuity doesn't really matter. And then we have so many people in the art department who are taking pictures of everything that we can line it up and make it work already. Okay. So that was okay. And you said reshoots. How many days were there of reshoots? I think 3, and so all of that was like satellitely in Los Angeles. So we didn't have to like fake snow, but we faked like Christmas decorations and like police station interviews.
Is there anything you want to tell us about that could be a lesson for people of like why you had to reshoot it? That was like something you were glad to be able to return to?
Yeah, sure. So like that entire montage of interrogations of me talking to, or the interviews that I'm having with the townsfolk was partially blending in the killer into the town, and then also like, which was a request from notes after test screenings, and then also like making this one sequence that I had written as a monologue of Liz Fairchild's character, Kelsey Edwards, who killed it in this monologue, but it was a long move down in the same way that Thunder Road is, and because of that, it was not functioning in the movie. It was like, that was me trying to make this like cool, it would have worked in an art film, and it didn't really work in a movie. And so that was also trying to like keep the audience's attention in this neat way that we had already done in another montage of detective pornography. And so because it was working in that one, I was like, cool, maybe we'll do this like me making coffee and doing these like interrogations and interviews blended in with Kelsey's interview.
That's wild. That's good to know. All right. So you as a director, your toughest scene. We got you as an actor. We got you as a writer. You as a director.
The first shot of the movie, we refer to lovingly as Puddlegate, which is the shot of after you see the moon in reflection of the puddle of blood in the wolf's paw. It cuts to a police officer stepping into a puddle and then moving up to the basement of the police station where the AA meeting is happening.
Right. It was a match frame edit, basically.
And it was the first day of production. It was the first shot of production. And we were shooting on this zoom lens. It was very heavy. And in dollying and moving up, it was all physically operated. And we didn't realize at the time that the lens was so old that there was breathing in the lens. So while the zoom was happening and there's a focus pull, it looks like the camera is zooming out. It's an optical trick where it looks like the camera is zooming out because you're pulling focus, and it's an old lens. It's called breathing in optics. And the whole camera team was like, there's an issue with this lens because it's zooming out while we're zooming in. And it just became this like hugely confusing thing because it was the first shot of the movie, and it was so important to us to continue to shoot the other 50 shots that we had to get that day. And the puddle wasn't working, and it was a nightmare to be able to get that one thing that is 2 seconds in the movie. You know, you'd never know. But that being day one and shot one, Puddlegate, man, it sucked.
Wow. All right. Well, look, you did a great job. Is there anything you're working on that you want to tell us about next? Something else to look out for in the future?
Yeah, we made another feature that's a horror, similar tone as Wolf of Snow Hollow.
It's already in the can?
Yeah, we shot it. We ran a crowd equity campaign for it on a platform called WeFunder, and we shot it in November and December with my same team, Matt Miller and Natalie Metzger and Benjamin Wiesner, and my buddy PJ and I co-wrote and co-directed it and co-star in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's about Hollywood. It's about this agency. So we play talent agents in the movie, and it's really scary and really funny, and hopefully it'll be available to watch sometime in the next year.
And it's scary, like, so it's a genre movie too?
Yeah.
In Hollywood?
It's like Zodiac. It's like several murders and then also this guy who's going through this nervous breakdown. It's really funny and it's really terrifying.
All right. Well, hopefully no agents who have signed up with the WGA signatory advisories are hurt in the movie. Only the agents that did not sign on the dotted line with the WGA. That's all I'm rooting for. I'm totally joking. Look, I love your movie. It was really funny, and I think people are going to be entertained by it, especially detective and serial killer junkies and werewolf junkies as well. So you've been very generous with your time. I can't wait to see what you do next. Jim, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thanks, man. And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to writer, director, actor, and producer Jim Cummings for coming down to speak about his latest film, The Wolf of Snow Hollow. And while you're online, I hope you search out Jim's film so you could watch it, so you could check it out any way that you're usually able to get films. You could rent it, you could own it. I hope you watch it during this Halloween season. He was able to get it out with the perfect timing. And it's a very entertaining film to watch, I might add. So make sure to support your independent cinema during this pandemic, especially independent horror. And while you're surfing around online, I hope you'll also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. Because yes, we are still publishing during a pandemic. And yes, our long-delayed pandemic issue 42, is coming out very soon. So now would be the perfect time to subscribe to issue 42 and also to the magazine because you'll have access to our archive which currently goes back to around issue 30 or so, but we're adding new old issues every day. But nonetheless, you could read us on a desktop or laptop or via the iPad app. And if you'd like to save $5, you could use discount code SAVE5 over at backstory.net, and that'll give you access to $5 off a 1-year subscription. You could also log in to the iPad by using that subscription. So you have so many options. It's so amazing. And if you're scared and you've never read us before and you want to check us out, of course, you could check out our free issue. So that's a great way to test drive us over at backstory.net. And look, in a pandemic where it's kind of hard to run a film magazine, your support means everything to myself and our staff. So thank you very much for considering supporting Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020. All rights reserved. Folks, I'm Jeff Goldsmith. I'm the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A. Thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.